It's Radio Free 501c, the podcast of Road Tulips Consulting. We're here with Season 7. So glad you're joining us. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp, CAEACNP, and I'm so glad you're here for this exciting year of so many great topics, so don't forget to subscribe. This episode is supported by USAE News, the weekly community newspaper of Association CVBs and hotels. Learn more about USAE News at usaenews.com. This week I'm joined by first-time guest Gregg Caren. He's here to talk with us about CVBs, civic engagement, and sports tourism. If you're like me and curious about CVBs, don't miss this one. Thanks to USAE News for sponsoring this episode. It's February 17, 2025. Episode 273 starts now. Hey everybody, it's Monday, February 17th, and that means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c, brought to you by Road Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Supp. I'm a CAE and an ACNP, and I'm so glad you're here with us this week for this fantastic conversation on President's Day. It's in the following days of the Super Bowl, which is one of the big things here in the United States. And so we're really excited to have Gregg Caren here to talk with us today. Because he is from the city that won in 2025. But before we dive into our conversation and I introduce our guest, welcome to our global audience. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. And a gentle reminder, if you haven't followed us yet or subscribed on your favorite podcast service, please take a moment to do that. This week, we're talking about civic engagement and sports tourism. Yes, they are related, and we're going to have a fun talk about that. But before we dive in, I want to welcome my first-time guest, Gregg Caren. Gregg, welcome to the show. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us a little about yourself?
You bet, Cecilia. First, thanks so much for having me. And I think it is poetic to be here in the wake of the Super Bowl, but also on President's Day. Of course, we are the founding fathers all started here. We wouldn't be celebrating President's Day if not for the first citywide convention in America, as I like to say. They called it the First Continental Congress and then the Second Continental Congress. And our convention bureau is not shy. We take credit for those bookings. The average daily rate was about 70 cents. And there were 13 attendees. And no, I'm just teasing. But yeah, in the wake of the Super Bowl, it's a very exciting time in Philadelphia. To restate, my name is Gregg Caren. I'm the president and CEO of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's my 5th year running my first nonprofit or not-for-profit. The Philadelphia CVB has both a 501c6 and a C3. So like a lot of folks coming out of the corporate sector, I used to sit on a lot of boards, but it's interesting to make that switch over and actually be responsible for running the day-to-day of a nonprofit, and especially one in the tourism industry. And it's just such a great place to be.
Well, and Philadelphia is a great city. If you haven't been there, I've been there before, but it's been a while, so I need to make my way back. And I also want to take a moment and thank USAE News for supporting this episode and connecting us with Gregg so that we can have this conversation. So, Gregg, you mentioned that your CVB is also a nonprofit and you have a foundation as well. But you were also explaining to me as we were getting ready for the episode that you have 3 segments within your organization that help the city of Philadelphia. Can you explain those to the audience?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it, Cecilia. I think in some ways we're a bit of a unicorn for convention bureaus. There are what we call them as business development divisions, and we distinguish that from our true traditional sales team by the following. Our 3 business development divisions are called PHL Sports, which is the lead into this conversation, and then one called PHL Life Science, which I'll dig into a little bit, and one called PHL Diversity. And each of them have been around for now more than 3 decades, and we're very proud of that. And each of them is meant to lean in not just to the industry that we sell to, but to the industry that we serve and the people that we serve in and around the greater Philadelphia area. PHL Sports, almost every city has a sports commission, right? It's a fun place to be, and we've got an extraordinary team that does that. Our executive director for PHL Sports is a gentleman named Larry Needle. He's been with us for 33 years. If you want to talk about somebody who loves his city and loves sports and loves to activate on those 2 things, it's a pretty extraordinary story in and of itself. But each of those business development divisions, and this is maybe an interesting model, not just for CVBs, but for other associations. At the end of the day, each of those business development units has its own advisory boards. So, of course, like all 501s, I report to a managing board of directors who decide about me and my future and our budget and the fiduciary responsibility. But each of those divisions has an executive director, which is my staff person, and an advisory board with a board chair that leads a roundtable of experts in those spaces. And not just a lucky, but a very fortuitous coincidence for us, the chair actually of our PHL sports division is a gentleman named Don Smolensky. Don is the president and CEO of our great Philadelphia Eagles and works for the great Laurie family, the owners of the Eagles. But it's just one measure of commitment that is one of the many things that makes us a very special city, is that commitment that we get from the private sector and the nonprofit sector, the sports teams and the sports venues. And again, on the life science side and the diversity side, it's a very unique model that I think more and more people are probably taking a look at, and has really played a major part in our growth as a city and a destination.
And the way that you described your structure, it is very similar to a lot of professional societies and trade associations and having councils or committees that handle different areas of the organization's work or give advice on that. And of course, the volunteer work that goes into that. So I
Sure.
think this is a very interesting model. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the diversity segment of
You
what you
bet.
do in Philadelphia, because I'm a big believer in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've written several articles on my blog about it. And of course, we're all talking about DEI right now in the new administration. So
You
could you
bet.
talk a little bit about your diversity efforts and what they do for the city?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm going to go way back in time. And so William Penn, of course, was the founder of Philadelphia and literally laid out the grid and the layout of our city. And he was also very intentional in naming of the city. Um, as a native of not of Philadelphia, but a transplant of 30 years, I always thought that City of Brotherly Love was a tagline, very much like I Love New York or Virginia is for Lovers or other. It just sounded like a great tagline that an ad agency came up with some years ago, and it stuck. And I never took Latin or Greek in any of my schooling. So I come to find out that Philadelphia, literally translated in Greek, is City of Brotherly Love. So this wasn't an ad tagline. It is, to me, it's every bit as much part of our DNA as the aloha spirit is in Hawaii. And people from the mainland often think that aloha is kitschy, but it's not. It's a very intentional part of culture and part of their inclusion and how they the welcoming spirit. And so I remind myself and my team of that very regularly, that the City of Brotherly Love is not a catchphrase. It is an intentional part of who we are. It's part of our DNA. And if you fast forward, William Penn, of course, was in the 1700s. So I'll fast forward to at least the last century, forgetting we're only a quarter century into the new one. Um, it was intentional by one of my predecessors. I'm the fourth CEO since the creation of these three business units. And PHL Diversity was originally formed as what was called the MAC, or Multicultural Affairs Congress. And it was really a twofold mission and purpose, some almost 35 years in the making, and true to that core today. And the twofold mission is the following. Number one, we want to make sure that we're working to attract events that will not only experience but mirror the great diversity and inclusivity of our city. Events that may not feel comfortable everywhere on the planet, but will feel comfortable here, no matter who they are, who they pray to, who they love, what they look like. Any of all the definitions that we all use in our day to day speak about what diversity is. So we are very intentional about that. We've hosted every one of the Divine Nine fraternal organizations. We've hosted all the Black MBAs and the Latin American teachers, and it really is a purposeful mission for us to let people come here and feel comfortable and be who they are during their events, and then explore our own diverse community that makes up Philadelphia. And I'll get back to that in just a second. But the second intentional core purpose was to make sure that when we book any of these events, whether they're related to diverse events or not, that there is economic prosperity that is felt across the city, that is not just at the convention center or at a major hotel or at a major attraction or the shops within a few blocks of the convention center. We want to make sure that the people who've invested, whether they're a big multinational corporation or somebody that's a fifth generation running a stand in our world famous Reading Terminal Market, selling a very specific food product or craft product, we want to make sure that they feel the economic prosperity when we bring in tens, thousands of people for any kind of event that comes to the city. So that was really the driving force, and it was formed by some of the best leaders in our city at the time, both in the municipal side and on the tourism side. And it's a model that I think, a lot has happened in the last 3 or 4 years that have driven our sister CVBs to actually mirror these types of efforts. But as I say, it's 35 years for us, so we take it very purposefully. Do you want me to talk about the other two divisions in tandem as well?
I I would because I want to explore with you the topic of civic engagement, and we were
Sure.
going to relate it to sports tourism specifically. And one of those segments is Sports Philadelphia. The other one's Life Sciences, which focuses on the healthcare, as you mentioned. So I would like you to dive into the first two as well, and then let's wrap it up, not wrap it up, but tie it together with the civic engagement.
Absolutely.
It sounds like your city's very engaged. You have an interested populace, and that you have great engagement and relationships with the citizens of Philadelphia.
Without question. So the only thing I'll say about the other two divisions is that they equally stand alone in their space. Each one of those is meant to lean on I mean, sports. There's no secret that Philadelphia is a sports town. If you don't know that, then you may be from another planet. But equally, we are a life science community. We have two of the first teaching hospitals in the country. Again, we are speaking offline. PCMA, which of course originally started as an organization for medical and life science meeting planners, was actually formed in Philadelphia. It'll be its 70th anniversary when we host convening leaders for PCMA coming up next January. So it's similar to sports. We're leaning on that community and leaning on that history and that expertise, and have an advisory board of professionals that I couldn't even afford to put around a table, but they understand what we're here to do as an economic development agency. We're focused on tourism, but that's what we are, an economic development agency. And so all three of those divisions are leaning on our city's strengths, whether it's sports, diversity, or life science,
Mhm.
all with the same modus operandi. How do we leverage those resources in our city to economic and tourism development for the city? And all of that does tie back to civic engagement. And it is, to me, one of the things that makes us, uh, I believe, one of the most special places. Every city thinks they're special in a certain way. What I found in my now 30 years living and working in and around the Philadelphia area is the following: the commitment that we get in our industry sector from for profit, not for profit, academic institutions, corporate institutions, city government, state government, all across the board, is a part of the magic formula that has led to our success as definitely a sports destination. And I'm separating sports destination versus sports town for a very, very intentional reason. Sports town, a lot of great sports towns across the country. That's just a great fan base. They're enthusiastic. They go out to every game, and they live or die by how their teams do that season. As a sports destination, when we think about our history and where we're going now into the next year, um, we've hosted probably hundreds over the years of NCAA related events. We hosted WrestleMania, which is one of the largest sporting events and entertainment events in the world, with people coming from over 50 or 60 countries around the world and staying longer for that event than for anything else. The average length of stay was about 4.5 days.
Mhm.
And I love WrestleMania because it actually used all of our major venues. They used our Lincoln Financial Field football stadium for the main events on Saturday and Sunday. They used our Wells Fargo Arena for their two televised weekly shows, Friday Night SmackDown and Monday Night Raw, if you're not familiar with all the great WrestleMania terminology in the WWE. And they used our convention center for a fan fest that took tens of thousands of people through there to just enjoy, experience, do face-to-face meetings, and everything from walking on to your own music and getting a video of yourself walking on as if you're a wrestling superstar, to getting a tattoo and having that streamed around the world as it's happening. But the civic engagement piece, as I mentioned before, to have not just the CEO of the Philadelphia Eagles taking his time to help manage this advisory board for us and having his peers do that in other areas, but to have a governor who completely understands tourism. Our convention center in Philadelphia it's not completely unique, but some convention centers are owned by cities, some by counties, and some by states. Our convention center, which is about a $1.4 billion investment in its original construction and its expansion, is owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our governor, when he was a local elected official as the county commissioner, actually sat on the board of the authority that oversees it. He completely gets the impact it has on 80,000 jobs for us around the Southeast Pennsylvania area. He completely gets the tax revenue implications for the city and for the state. And we're not it's funny because we are more of an what we affectionately call an eds and meds city, meaning academic institutions, hospitals, universities, higher learning. And so when we come to lean on our corporate community, there's only a limited number of those around in Philadelphia. We have some unbelievable institutions like Comcast Universal NBC, like Independence Blue Cross, who are there for us time and time again. And we can literally point to that civic engagement. And I just did an actual panel locally here with my board chair, who reports directly to Brian Roberts, who is the chair, the Roberts family, that the founders of Comcast. If we didn't have their civic engagement, we would have never had an RNC. We would have never had a DNC. We would have never had a World Meeting of Families and Papal Visit. We would have never had an NFL draft. We would not be looking ahead now at 6 matches for the World Cup for FIFA. And a week later, the MLB All-Star Game. And so if you just look at calendar 2026, what I've just said in the last 15 minutes, we're hosting convening leaders in January. We're hosting the World Cup 6 matches, including the 4th of July, America's birthday, and then hosting the MLB All-Star Game. For any city in the country, any one of those would be a banner year to host and manage and serve those events. When you add it together for us, it's I don't want to say it's business as usual, but we have this great muscle memory of civic engagement that we still have people around that in one way, shape, or form helped us attract and host all those other events that I mentioned: RNC, DNC, draft, Pope, and these NCAA events and PGA championships. So I think it's a critical thing that that I when I think about advice that I give to other CEOs, not just in the CVB world, but in the nonprofit world, is to not underestimate or overthink your board makeup. I always think that our board is actually, when I took this position, our board is actually pretty large for a nonprofit and for an organization our size. When I got here, our board was about 65 or 70 people sat on our board, and I spoke to our former chair, who was kind enough to stay with us for a very long time. And I asked him, what's your thought process behind such a large board? And his answer was very simple. He said, it's like a chamber of commerce to me. If there are people who have eyes, ears, and a mouth and are willing to see, hear, listen, and help advocate for what we're trying to do for economic development through tourism, then why wouldn't we want them around the table, whatever that is? And then, of course, we have what we call administrative committees, and most associations would call an executive committee. That's a core group of about 15 that really are the fiduciaries in terms of budget and hiring and setting policy for us. But I learned very quickly that he was right. We had a board meeting just yesterday, and it was a snow day. Schools are closed and delayed and everything else. We still had 40 board members show up in person, because we've really taken a hard stand to not, aside for committee work, to not use Zoom and to force people to come to our board meetings. And my chair and my position on that is, we serve an industry that has no ability to delay their opening. No hotel can delay their opening 2 hours because it's snowing. No restaurant, no convention center. And so we want to lead by example and show that we are committed to their same commitment to their work and their customers that they are. And so we had 40 people show up on a snowy Wednesday morning. It ended up being, of course, as usual, not as bad as people thought. But to have those 40 people in the room, many of them are CEOs from around our city, CEOs in media, CEOs in banking, CEOs of arts and cultural institutions and historical institutions, and have them engaged for an hour and a half, for each of our board meetings. I always say, bring it on as far as board membership, and make sure that every one of your board members, in my case, it's not hard, but make sure they're all smarter than you. I want people to call us and to question and come up with ideas that we just have never thought of. And invariably that happens if you've got an extraordinary group of people that are that committed to your cause.
I think that's great leadership modeling to make sure that you're doing things in person, because hospitals can't open late or close. As you said,
Right.
hotels, service areas can't do that. And, frankly, a city can't shut down necessarily either unless a major issue, a major snow event or major event of some other kind. Now, speaking of major events, you've already said you have 3 major events coming up in 2026. So, what is the magic in the Philadelphia water that's bringing all these great meetings and events to your city?
It's a secret formula that's not so secret. There are probably three or four overlapping things that just make it such an unbelievable, perfect destination along the Northeast corridor. That some aspects of it may be obvious to people that are listening to this, and some they may not have thought of. Pure geography is a good start, right? We literally are in sort of the midpoint of, we talk about, especially people like you and me that live along the Northeast corridor. Northeast corridor to us refers to Amtrak and the train service that runs, between, for us, DC to Boston, and being a key core corridor. But then if you expand that to sort of trains, planes, and automobiles, we're at the, right off the I-95 corridor as well. We've got Philadelphia International Airport with a major American Airlines hub. We're not their largest hub, but we are their largest transatlantic hub, which people don't know, which another also makes it for international associations or medical groups. And of course, American then ties to the One World Alliance. Um, so yeah, the hubs that they have in places like Miami and Chicago and Dallas are larger in terms of flights per day, but we have most flights that go across the Atlantic Ocean of any American Airlines airport. That's a critical selling feature for us. You add to that, USA Today for the last 2 years has called Philadelphia America's most walkable city. If I were to sort of create a verbal picture of how our center city, as we call it, or downtown lays out, we're bounded by the Schuylkill River to the west and the Delaware River to the east. On the west side, it's the Rocky Steps and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. If you start at the Art Museum and run up the Rocky Steps and back down, and wanted to walk directly across the entirety of our center city and ended up in our most historical square mile in Old City and Penn's Landing and the Delaware River, that's less than a 60-minute walk across the entirety of our city. But then within that, you can weave through some of the most amazing neighborhoods. We have one of the most historic Chinatowns in the country. Well, one of the most historic, formally named neighborhoods in the country. Our convention center sits smack in the middle of that 60-minute walk across the city, adjacent to our headquarters Marriott Hotel, the largest hotel in the state, which is also attached to that Reading Terminal Market, one of the most unbelievable public markets on the planet. Where we think of that, you think of food courts in the modern day, but here you're going for great Amish baked goods, and you're going for great Southern cuisine at a down-home diner where you could get grits and biscuits for breakfast. Um, you start adding all these things together, and you add together the brass tacks of what a planner looks at, over 14,000 hotel rooms, and more unique and special venues than you can find anywhere on the planet. I think that in many ways the country has become homogenized by a lot of big boxes, and we've all seen it in terms of retail stores and restaurant chains and things like that. But if you come to Philadelphia, there are more things here that you can't experience anywhere else, both as a visitor and as a business event planner, as we say at PCMA. Things like the Franklin Institute, one of the first of its kind in the country, that can accommodate 5,000 people for a closing reception. The Philadelphia Museum of Art, as I mentioned, with some of the most amazing works of art on the planet. I always joked, if Rocky would have just swung those doors open when he ran up the steps of the art museum, he might have had a totally different trajectory in his career, because there is an entirety of a museum behind those doors. But he had to turn around and throw his arms up in the air. And the irony is that actually Sylvester Stallone, who has still great ties to Philadelphia, has become an accomplished artist, and an amazing artwork that he's created himself. And that's another great anniversary, is that December 3rd of 2026 will be the 50th anniversary of the release of the movie Rocky. So for the last 2 years, we've been very intentional about leaning in on rock. I always say Rocky is to Philadelphia what Elvis is to Las Vegas. He's iconic. And the movie legacy and the story legacy is one of overcoming adversity. And there's just so many great parallels that we use. And Mr. Stallone is very, very closely tied to us. We actually have a new visitor center right outside those Rocky steps that's got an entire exclusive shop to Rocky merchandise license that you can't even buy anywhere else in person on the planet.
Wow, I agree. He is very tied to the city, and as far as his art goes, I should say, he moved to Florida to
Yeah.
rejuvenate his creative juices because he said, "Oh, if you stay in one place too long, you're going to get stale." And a funny story about when he sold his home in California, the person who bought it would not buy the house unless he left his Rocky statue behind that he had. I guess he has one of the copies. There must be more than one. So he is just so much a part of our culture now and the whole Rocky
That's right.
family. And now it's Academy Awards season and Turner Classic Movies. I'm sure we'll show it eventually since it won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay the
That's
year
right.
it came out. So it's really a great movie. I've seen it many times. I'm sure you have too. And when I've worked on staff at associations at meetings in Philadelphia, of course, all the members want to run up the steps and do the Rocky pose and get their picture taken, especially at the end of a fun run.
You
So
can't not do it.
exactly, you have to do it. You must run up those steps. So speaking of sports, okay, we can't ignore the Eagle in the Room, which is the Super Bowl win that you just had in your city. So congratulations, go Birds,
Thank
right?
thank you.
So the Eagles have won the Super Bowl and did a fantastic job doing it. They played very well in the Super Bowl. So what effect is this going to have on the city of Philadelphia as far as tourism or maybe attracting different kind of events going forward? Because hey, you're the home of the Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, and there's short-term success and long-term success. Look, any team that even goes to the Super Bowl is a big deal, and kudos to them. I mean, just getting there and again getting there twice in 3 or 4 years, which obviously both the Chiefs have done and the Eagles have done. Um, Chiefs, of course, had won the two prior games, which gave us that spirit of Rocky in our Eagles that said, you know what, we're coming in hard and we're coming in with a plan, and they certainly executed on that plan. In the short term, there's this obvious economic impact to us. Our hotels are selling out more. There's a lot of celebration in the city. There will be a parade tomorrow that'll start in South Philadelphia at our sports complex. Come straight up Broad Street, around City Hall, and down the John F. Kennedy Parkway, right up to the Art Museum, where the Eagles will proudly take a stage in front of the Art Museum and greet from some million or so fans. But for the long term, I think success begets success. That's one of the expressions I use very often here, and it's not just about a Super Bowl win, but I keep referring to those successes and those touch points along the way that nobody could ever look at us as a city or as a destination, and I define them each separately, and say they're a one trick pony or they got lucky. I think that the model set forth, as I said, by William Penn, and the history of creating a country. My friend Martha Sheridan in Boston, will we debate sometimes about where the country started. We have a lot of jabbing lines we take at each other, but the formation of the nation happened here. And I do think that, for example, for FIFA to select us as one of 14 North American host cities for the World Cup was exciting, but I think it was very interesting and meaningful that they said a match on the 4th of July, essentially, we're going to be playing the world's game in the birthplace of America on America's birthday. I don't know that there's any more symbolism than you can get than that, in terms of that nod. And again, part of their decision making process, looking back at things like the NFL draft and those other large scale events that have everything from security and logistics concerns, um, to having winning teams, I think is part of the story. And when I mention things like our Chinatown and our neighborhood and our convention center district and our arts district, and in addition to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, we have the Barnes Foundation. Dr. Barnes, one of the most prolific private art collections in the world, and his collections was in his estate in the western suburbs for forever, since his passing, and through his heirs, we were able to literally recreate to within an inch the spaces in his home, and create a space on our parkway where all the art museums are. You can't come to the city without going to the Barnes Foundation. Um, every one of these things is a touch point that gives us, for some reason or other, national or international notoriety. On the life science side, if you were to Google search royalties from the COVID vaccine that all started at the University of Pennsylvania, it's unbelievable. The impact that we have on people's lives here through our medical institutions, our academic institutions. There's a statistic somewhere that says I'll get in trouble, but I believe it's 1 in 10 medical practitioners in the country spent some part of their medical and life science career in Philadelphia, whether it was as an undergraduate or a graduate school or doing their residency at a hospital. 1 in 10 medical practitioners in the country has spent some amount of their career and academic career in Philadelphia. All these things are not accidents. They're because we are the real deal in terms of what we have available to us. And like a lot of people, we take for granted what's in our own backyard. But people that come here usually leave with their jaws dropping for one reason or another.
Yeah, it's an amazing city. And I'm going to paraphrase a tagline from the city of St. Louis, Missouri. Where the country began, it continues. That's the story of Philadelphia. We
Yeah,
used to say that about Laclede's Landing in the city of St. Louis, where it began, it continues,
sure.
because that's along the river. And the river was a big part of the life there, as the two rivers are in Philadelphia. So, before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of a pitch as the leader of your CVB. So, if I'm an association and I'm looking for a city to have a meeting at in a few years, what would attract me to come to Philadelphia as an association?
So I think I'll go back to success begets success. If you look at your peers in that whether they're in your sector or not, but if you look at all the organizations that have made the decision to come here, one of the largest recently for us was the Alzheimer's Association International, which is their rotation is they do U.S. for 2 years and they go international. So 2 years ago they were in Amsterdam, and this past summer they were here. We did an entire white paper that I would love to share with anybody that's interested. An entire white paper just about that event, and we actually hired a former Philadelphia Inquirer reporter and let her loose and asked her to write an entire story about all aspects of the decision process and the activation and the event being here and its impact on the Alzheimer's group themselves and on the city. And that tells a lot of the story that I'm going to try and summarize here. If you look at some of the things I've mentioned, the centrality of the Northeast Corridor, the infrastructure, the walkability, we certainly put shuttles in place when we have 20 and 30 hotels, but in theory, you could walk from any hotel in Center City to our convention center in 30 minutes or less. So we're able to do large sporting events and volleyball tournaments and things like that it can accommodate it. I think we're also still one of the best values on the Northeast corridor. Look, we'd love to double our average daily rates if we could. Our hoteliers certainly would. But if you simply compare the cost of hosting an event, the cost of the rooms, the cost of food, and everything else versus some of our sister cities along the Northeast corridor, we are an absolute bargain. But when you look at the unique things, I think that's what makes the difference. The walkability is just the beginning. It's what you can walk to. You can walk around a lot of cities that have maybe less of a life going on. 30% of the people who live in Philadelphia work in Philadelphia. So what that says is we're not a city that closes down at 5 o'clock like a lot of central business districts tend to. We're a city that if you go to Rittenhouse Square, which is just a few blocks from where my office is, you're going to see life and you're going to see farmers markets and things on the weekends and see people engaged in our communities. If you look at the last few years of James Beard nominees and winners, we've got dozens of them. We're an amazing culinary city. And what I love most about our culinary city is how close our culinary community is. These chefs and restaurateurs who win these awards are very close knit in of themselves. They're not competitors. They're a family, and COVID was a proof time for a lot of us. And what I saw restaurateurs doing to keep their employees working, but more importantly, even to keep feeding our community, there are just thousands of stories that if you and I had a couple of days to talk, um, it is part of that heart and soul, and it does go back to that brotherly love and sisterly affection, which was added on a couple hundred years later. Um, but when you walk around our city, you can feel the energy, you can feel the embrace, and yeah, I wouldn't wear an opposing jersey at a Philadelphia Eagles football game. I'd probably advise against it. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm very proud of our city. I'm very proud of the city that I've lived longer than anywhere else, and I'm very proud to call it home.
Well, it really comes across, Greg, your love for the city, your passion for the work that you do helping the city. And that's what I think the heart of nonprofit is all about, is that passion for helping and changing and bringing people together. And that white paper you mentioned sounds like a fantastic resource. So, as I like to do with my guest, I like to ask them, what's the one thought you'd like the audience to take away today And then how can they get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more and maybe reach out about that great white paper as a tool for planning?
Sure. Well, I think I'll close as I open. It's not a pitch about Philadelphia, it's just a pitch of my philosophy for what we do and how we do it. I think that leaning on civic pride and civic responsibility, and civic can mean a lot of different things. Look, I know a lot of membership associations aren't positioned as we are, that are sort of a part of a community. So I would just expand civic to not necessarily mean the people that are around you in your geographic municipality, but civic in terms of your industry and engagement. And again, a lot of professional groups have that kind of passion and that volunteer base. But if you don't, or if it's not strong enough, you need to revisit it, because I often say the value that I get from our volunteer chairs and our volunteer board members sometimes can be as valuable as 10 full-time employees, because it's those people who have outside perspective and true passion for what we do. In our case, it's marketing a destination and bringing people from around the world to visit us. But that can relate to any other industry as well, and not being afraid. Again, I think a lot of us think about, all right, how can do I manage my board, or does my board manage me? I think if it's done right, neither one of those things should be the case, right? You should be able to have a relationship with a board where you should be able to push back on something because of what either your knowledge or your beliefs are, but at the same time have a board that's smarter than you and more powerful than you to be able to say, here's another way of doing something or getting from point A to point B. And I've got the experience or the wherewithal, whatever that means, whether it's available time or money or contacts to help move the needle. Those advisories boards I mentioned are all extensions of our sales team. We've got doctors and nurses who understand the importance of bringing medical conventions to their backyard that they would never have even thought of if we didn't have an entity called PHL Life Science. So we've got ambassadors built in that are some of, when I look around that room, I couldn't afford their time. I couldn't measure up to their IQ. But we've got medical professionals that say, we need to get my neurology or my surgeons or my nursing group to come to Philadelphia and have them experience what I already know as a local professional.
And how can people get in touch with you?
So my email is very simply, it's Gregg with two G's, Gregg at discoverphl.com. Of course, our website is the same. It's www.discoverphl.com. And just very, very appreciative of your time and anybody who's listening, and happy to share any follow-up information, including that white paper. I think it's a fascinating study, whether you're on the supplier side or the association side.
Well, thank you. And thank you for offering to share that with the broader audience. I know I have learned a lot about CVBs today and how they work. I have participated in events when I've worked at associations and done my small part, but really had no idea about the breadth and depth that CVBs offer and bring. And I do know that we all depend on CVBs to help our meetings and events be successful. So thank you for that.
Well, you bet, you bet. And if I need her, my mayor is right alongside. We're on our 100th mayor, and the city of Philadelphia, after 100 mayors, got it right and elected our first woman mayor. But our mayor, our city council president, and our governor are all there behind us to help attract and close business, and that's great to have as backing.
That's wonderful. And I have to say, though, as old as Philadelphia is, it's kind of funny that they've only had 100 mayors.
Well,
But food for thought.
food for thought. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Well, and I do know that the Quaker spirit lives on in Pennsylvania, especially in the city of Philadelphia. So even though we have to go rogue for now, I want to thank Gregg Caren for joining me this week to talk about civic engagement, sports tourism, and all the different things CVBs do for cities. So thank you, Gregg.
Thank you, Cecilia. It's been a real pleasure.
We have to wrap up, but I want to encourage you, if you want to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting, go to our website, roguetulips.com. Check out our services page, and then let's have a conversation and see if we can work together. If you're interested in ongoing education for the CAE exam or renewal credits, check out our education page. And of course, check out our podcast page where you can find this conversation with Gregg or some of the other conversations we've had so far. And check out our blog, Going Rogue, to find out what's on my mind every week. So thanks for joining us, everyone. And on behalf of Gregg and myself, we'll see you next time. That's it for this week. I hope you really loved this episode as much as I did. Thanks for listening. Learn more about how our experience and knowledge at Rogue Tulips can give your organization the strategic edge to reach its goals. Check out our website at roguetulips.com. We'd love to talk with you and see how we can work together. Thanks.